began as a hushed conversation behind Kensington Palace walls, one that aides tried to downplay and courtiers quickly silenced. But the look on Princess Catherine's face as she exited that private meeting said everything the palace couldn't. Something was wrong, and it involved Charlotte. What was first dismissed as a rumor soon turned into a royal firestorm, now confirmed by the very people who fought to protect it. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. For weeks, rumors drifted quietly through royal circles, appearing briefly before disappearing again beneath layers of official silence. Those closest to the palace insisted there was nothing unusual happening. Public schedules continued. Appearances remained carefully managed. Statements were measured and calm. Yet behind those reassuring words, concern was beginning to spread among people who rarely allowed themselves to speculate. Something had changed, and the change seemed to center around Princess Charlotte. According to multiple insiders, a private meeting was arranged with unusual urgency. Present were Prince William, Princess Catherine, and a select group of medical advisors whose involvement immediately raised questions among palace staff. Such meetings were not unheard of, but the level of secrecy surrounding this one felt different. Access was restricted. Discussions were reportedly confined to a very small circle. Even senior aides who normally handled sensitive family matters were left outside the process. Within hours, instructions were quietly passed down advising staff not to discuss the gathering under any circumstances. That silence only intensified curiosity. The palace had weathered countless storms over the years, yet this response felt unusually defensive. Employees who had spent decades serving the institution later described an atmosphere of tension that seemed impossible to ignore. Conversations stopped when certain names were mentioned. Questions went unanswered. Even routine communications became strangely guarded. It was as though everyone understood the gravity of the situation, while simultaneously pretending nothing had happened. Then came the moment that sparked even greater concern. Catherine was reportedly seen leaving the meeting looking noticeably shaken. Those who encountered her afterward described a woman carrying the weight of troubling information. She remained composed, but there was an unmistakable seriousness surrounding her. For many observers, it was the first visible sign that the whispers might contain more truth than anyone wanted to admit. Later that same evening, attention shifted to William. Sources claim he spent considerable time with Charlotte in private, offering comfort and reassurance. No official explanation followed, no clarifications was issued. Yet for those watching closely, the image of a future king focusing entirely on his daughter spoke volumes. Whatever had emerged during that meeting was clearly significant enough to command his full attention. As concern grew, another unexpected development began unfolding far from the medical discussions that had triggered the initial anxiety. Deep within records connected to Queen Elizabeth's private papers, an overlooked discovery reportedly surfaced. At first, it appeared insignificant, merely another archived item among thousands of carefully preserved royal documents. But the moment staff examined it more closely, everything changed. The file bore a name that immediately transformed a family concern into something far larger. William, a sealed document, hidden away for years and carrying the future king's name, had unexpectedly resurfaced. Suddenly, what began as concern over Charlotte appeared connected to something much older, something deliberately protected and possibly forgotten. Questions multiplied. Why had the document remained hidden? Who knew it existed? And perhaps most importantly, why was it emerging precisely when the royal family was already facing one of its most unsettling moments? But the chilling truth wasn't just about Charlotte's health. It was tied to a royal legacy that had long been buried, until now. For decades, it sat untouched among the late Queen's most private papers, hidden so carefully that even senior members of the royal household reportedly knew nothing about it. Yet one forgotten file would soon threaten to rewrite everything insiders thought they knew. The discovery of the document should have been impossible. That is what made it so unsettling. In an institution built upon records, protocols, and layers of preservation stretching back centuries, very little simply appears without explanation. According to individuals familiar with the matter, this particular file seemed to emerge from a corner of the royal archive that had long escaped attention. What initially looked like an ordinary sealed record quickly revealed itself to be something far more significant. The moment archivists recognized the markings connected to Queen Elizabeth's private collection, the atmosphere surrounding the discovery reportedly changed completely. The late Queen was known for many things during her historic reign: steadiness, discipline, patience. But those closest to her often spoke of another quality that received far less public attention. She was a planner. Not simply for months or years ahead, but sometimes for decades. Long before crises emerged, she was said to have considered how future generations might navigate them. Long before disputes developed, she quietly prepared guidance designed to outlast her own lifetime. It was a habit formed through experience, strengthened by duty, and refined over 70 years on the throne. That reputation suddenly gave new meaning to the document carrying William's name. According to reports circulating within royal circles, the file had allegedly been prepared specifically for the future king. Not for public release. Not for official archives, not for historians. It was reportedly intended for William alone. The realization sent shockwaves through those who became aware of its existence. If true, it suggested that Queen Elizabeth had chosen to leave behind something deeply personal, something she believed should reach her grandson only when the time was right. Questions immediately followed. Why had it remained hidden for so long? Why had no public reference to it ever surfaced? And perhaps most intriguingly, why had the Queen apparently trusted only a small number of advisors with knowledge of its existence? As those questions spread, a clearer picture slowly began to emerge. Throughout her reign, the Queen was known to leave written observations, instructions, and reflections intended for specific circumstances. Most were routine, some offered guidance, others served as historical records. But insiders began whispering that this document belonged to an entirely different category. It was reportedly placed under extraordinary protection, with trusted advisors receiving instructions to safeguard certain materials after her passing. These were not papers meant for immediate review. They were meant to wait. The implications were enormous. If the document truly concerned William, then it likely touched upon matters extending far beyond family relationships. It pointed toward the future itself, the future of the monarchy, the future responsibilities of the heir, the future challenges Queen Elizabeth may have anticipated long before anyone else saw them coming. That possibility triggered immediate concern within palace circles. The document's existence was no longer merely a historical curiosity. It became a matter of sensitivity and security. Reports suggest that quiet measures were taken to ensure archive access remained tightly controlled. Staff responsible for maintaining royal records were allegedly reminded of confidentiality obligations. Certain materials were reviewed. Certain procedures were strengthened. Nothing dramatic was announced publicly, but beneath the surface, caution was clearly taking hold. Because once the existence of the file became known, another fear emerged alongside it. What if the wrong person gained access? What if words intended only for William were seen by someone else? Suddenly, the document was no longer just a message from the past. It had become a potential source of conflict in the present. And as more people became aware of its existence, the mystery only deepened. The Queen had protected it. Advisors had guarded it. Years had passed without anyone speaking of it. Such extraordinary secrecy could only mean one thing. Whatever rested inside those pages carried a significance far greater than anyone first imagined. As whispers spread through royal corridors, one question became impossible to ignore. Why had the Queen worked so hard to keep this document hidden? The answer, according to palace insiders, was as explosive as it was unexpected. This was never intended to be a document for public eyes. More importantly, it was never meant for Camilla to discover. The deeper palace officials looked into the mystery surrounding the sealed file, the more unsettling the picture became. What initially appeared to be a forgotten document hidden among Queen Elizabeth's private papers was now being viewed in an entirely different light. According to reports circulating among those familiar with royal procedures, the secrecy surrounding the file was not accidental. It had been designed, planned, protected. Every layer surrounding the document appeared to point toward one unmistakable conclusion. The late Queen had gone to extraordinary lengths to control exactly who would one day read its contents. That realization immediately changed the conversation. This was no longer simply a story about an old letter resurfacing after years of silence. It became a story about intention, about trust, about a monarch who spent her life safeguarding an institution and who may have been preparing one final message for the future long before anyone realized it. Sources close to royal circles claim the document carries strict instructions regarding access. While official confirmation remains elusive, whispers suggest that Queen Elizabeth wanted the file preserved until the appropriate moment and delivered directly to William, not to committees, not to advisors, not to multiple members of the family, to William alone. That detail, more than anything else, fueled growing speculation about what the Queen believed was important enough to protect beyond her own lifetime. Those who knew Elizabeth best often described her as someone who thought in generations rather than years. Every major decision was measured against the future stability of the crown. Every challenge was viewed through the lens of continuity. She had witnessed political upheaval, family scandals, public criticism, and historic change. Through it all, her focus rarely shifted from one central mission: ensuring that the monarchy remained strong for those who would inherit it. If she truly left guidance intended only for William, many believe it reflected that same commitment to future generations. As that possibility gained traction, attention turned toward the safeguards reportedly placed around the royal archives. Individuals responsible for managing sensitive materials were said to have followed unusually strict procedures regarding certain records connected to the Queen's personal collection. Some files were catalogued differently. Others were reportedly known only to a limited number of trusted figures. The goal, according to insiders, was not secrecy for its own sake. It was protection. Protection of information that could be misunderstood, misused, or revealed before the proper time. But as the years following Queen Elizabeth's death unfolded, a different challenge began emerging inside royal circles. The balance of influence within the monarchy was shifting. New voices gained prominence. New relationships reshaped internal dynamics, and with those changes came growing tension between those focused on preserving long-standing traditions and those embracing a different vision for the institution's future. At the center of many of those discussions was Camilla. Her position within the royal family had undeniably evolved. Responsibilities expanded, visibility increased, influence appeared stronger than ever before. Yet according to some palace observers, that rise also generated unease among certain traditionalists who remained deeply protective of the late Queen's legacy. They worried not necessarily about public appearances, but about access. Access to information, access to influence, access to decisions that could shape the monarchy's future direction. Those concerns intensified as news of the document quietly spread. Suddenly, an uncomfortable question began circulating behind closed doors. Had someone attempted to learn more about the file before it resurfaced? Had curiosity crossed boundaries that were never meant to be crossed? No evidence publicly confirmed such claims, but the very existence of the question revealed how sensitive the situation had become. The atmosphere inside palace circles reportedly grew increasingly strained. Conversations became guarded. Trust became harder to measure. Every new detail surrounding the document seemed to raise another mystery. If Queen Elizabeth had worked this hard to protect the file, then what exactly was she trying to prevent? And if William was truly the intended recipient, what responsibility was she placing in his hands? What began as an archival discovery was now evolving into something far larger. Old loyalties were being tested. Quiet divisions were becoming impossible to ignore. And somewhere at the center of it all sat a sealed message from a queen who may have anticipated far more than anyone ever realized. But what happened next would turn a carefully guarded royal secret into a full-blown palace crisis. By the time senior officials realized something had gone wrong, the damage may already have been done. A document hidden for years was suddenly at the center of private conversations no one could explain. The discovery of Queen Elizabeth's sealed file had already unsettled the palace. But what followed transformed into something far more serious. What had begun as a carefully contained matter inside the archives was now spreading through royal circles with alarming speed. The document was no longer simply an object of curiosity. It had become the focus of speculation, uncertainty, and growing anxiety among people who understood exactly how dangerous misunderstood information could become. According to reports from individuals familiar with the situation, questions first began surfacing when unusual activity was allegedly noticed around records connected to the late Queen's private collection. On their own, the incidents appeared minor, a request here, an inquiry there. Nothing dramatic enough to trigger immediate alarm. Yet when viewed together, they formed a pattern that some insiders found difficult to ignore. The concern was not necessarily that rules had been broken. It was the possibility that interest in the document had emerged long before its existence became widely known. That possibility sent senior aides into a quiet scramble. Behind closed doors, efforts reportedly began to determine exactly who had access to certain materials and when. Archive records were reviewed. Internal procedures were revisited. Conversations that had once seemed routine suddenly carried new significance. The goal was simple but urgent. Understand whether the secrecy surrounding the document had truly remained intact. The answers were far from reassuring. As more questions surfaced, word of the situation eventually reached William. Sources claim he was privately informed about the existence of the document and the concerns surrounding it before any wider discussions could take place. For a man already carrying immense responsibilities as heir to the throne, the revelation reportedly added another layer of pressure to an already difficult period. This was not merely a forgotten family record. It was something his grandmother had apparently intended specifically for him, something protected for years, something capable of affecting conversations at the highest levels of the monarchy. The emotional weight of that realization was impossible to ignore. Queen Elizabeth had spent a lifetime preparing others for duty. Now, even after her passing, she seemed to be placing another responsibility directly into William's hands. Yet before he could fully understand what the document contained, debate over how to handle it was already intensifying around him. Within palace circles, opinions reportedly became divided. Some believed the document should remain tightly restricted until its purpose could be fully understood. Others argued that transparency among senior family members was essential to prevent misunderstandings. Both sides claimed to be protecting the institution. Both believed they were acting in the monarchy's best interests. Yet their disagreements exposed a deeper tension that had been quietly growing ever since the Queen's death. Caught in the middle of those discussions was Catherine. According to several reports, she urged caution. Not panic, not confrontation, caution. Those familiar with her approach described someone who understood the potential consequences of rushing into decisions before all the facts were known. The document had remained hidden for years. A few additional days spent understanding its significance would not change that. But reckless reactions could. Her concerns proved increasingly relevant as speculation surrounding the file expanded. Every conversation seemed to produce a new theory. Every theory created another question. And the more people discussed the document, the more dangerous misinterpretation became. What if the Queen's words were taken out of context? What if guidance intended for a specific circumstance was applied to an entirely different situation? What if personal reflections were mistaken for formal instructions? Those fears quickly became the center of the debate, because regardless of what the document contained, one fact remained undeniable. Queen Elizabeth had protected it for a reason. The challenge now was understanding that reason before assumptions filled the gaps. As discussions intensified and uncertainty spread through the palace, anticipation surrounding the contents of the document reached a breaking point. Everyone seemed focused on the same mystery. Everyone wanted answers. Yet few were prepared for the possibility that the greatest surprise was not how the document had resurfaced, but what had been waiting inside it all along. Yet the true shock wasn't that the document had surfaced. It was what the Queen allegedly wrote inside. Those who claim knowledge of the document describe it not as a legal order, but as something far more powerful, a personal roadmap for the future king, written by the monarch who understood the crown better than anyone alive. For days, speculation had centered on who may have known about the document, who may have tried to access it, and why it had remained hidden for so long. But once attention shifted toward its contents, the entire conversation changed. Suddenly, the mystery was no longer about secrecy. It was about meaning. According to individuals who claim familiarity with the file, what Queen Elizabeth left behind was not a list of commands or a formal constitutional directive. Instead, it was reportedly a deeply personal message intended to guide William through challenges she believed would define both his future and the future of the monarchy itself. That distinction mattered enormously. Throughout her reign, Queen Elizabeth rarely relied on dramatic declarations. Her influence came from consistency, patience, and an unwavering understanding of duty. Those qualities, according to palace insiders, formed the foundation of the document. Rather than focusing on titles, ceremonies, or privileges, the alleged message centered on responsibility. It reportedly reminded William that the crown was never about personal comfort or personal ambition. It was about service, about sacrifice, about carrying burdens that few people could fully understand. Sources suggest the document repeatedly emphasized the importance of protecting the institution above individual interests. For Elizabeth, the monarchy had survived because generations before her accepted that principle. Personal wishes came second. Public duty came first. It was a lesson she learned during some of the most difficult periods of her reign, and one she allegedly believed would become even more important in the years ahead. That message carried a powerful warning. According to reports, portions of the document addressed the dangers of influence and misplaced loyalty. Not enemies outside the palace walls, but pressures much closer to home. The Queen reportedly understood that every future monarch would face competing voices, competing priorities, and competing agendas. Some would offer advice, some would seek favor, some would attempt to shape decisions for their own benefit. The challenge, according to those familiar with the document, was learning to recognize the difference between loyalty to a person and loyalty to the crown itself. It was a lesson forged through decades of experience. Over 70 years, Elizabeth witnessed relationships rise and fall. She watched public opinion shift. She saw trusted allies disappear and unexpected challenges emerge. Through every crisis, one truth remained constant. Public trust was the monarchy's most valuable asset. Once damaged, it could take years to rebuild. According to insiders, the document urged William never to lose sight of that reality. Every decision, every partnership, every major choice would ultimately be judged through the lens of public confidence. The emotional impact on William was reportedly profound. Those close to royal circles suggest that reading the document felt less like reviewing a historical record and more like receiving one final conversation from the grandmother who had spent decades preparing him for his future role. There were no opportunities for follow-up questions, no chance for clarification. Only her words, preserved across time, carrying the weight of an entire reign. That realization reportedly left a lasting impression. The message was not focused solely on William himself. According to reports, Queen Elizabeth repeatedly looked beyond the present toward generations yet to come. Her guidance allegedly reflected a determination to safeguard the monarchy for George, Charlotte, Louis, and every future heir who would eventually inherit its responsibilities. The institution she spent a lifetime protecting was not meant to survive one reign. It was meant to endure across many. During that emotionally charged period, Catherine reportedly became one of William's most important sources of support. While debates continued elsewhere and speculation intensified around the document, she is said to have encouraged reflection rather than reaction. The Queen's words carried immense significance, but understanding them required patience. The responsibility William faced was not simply about honoring the past. It was about applying those lessons to an uncertain future. And as he continued absorbing the full weight of his grandmother's guidance, another reality was quietly beginning to emerge. The document had already changed the conversation inside royal circles. Different interpretations were forming. Different interests were colliding. What seemed at first like a private message was beginning to create public consequences. But as William absorbed the weight of his grandmother's words, another battle was already beginning behind closed doors. What began as a private family matter quickly evolved into a struggle over trust, authority, and the future direction of the monarchy itself. The moment word of Queen Elizabeth's hidden document spread beyond a small circle of trusted individuals, the atmosphere surrounding the palace changed. What had started as a quiet effort to understand the significance of a sealed file was now becoming something far more complicated. Conversations that were once focused on discovery shifted toward control. Questions that initially centered on history began revolving around power. And beneath the surface, a growing divide was taking shape between different groups, each convinced they understood what was best for the monarchy's future. At the heart of the tension was a simple but deeply uncomfortable reality. No one could fully agree on what should happen next. According to palace insiders, competing royal circles quickly formed around different interpretations of the situation. Some believed the document should remain strictly private, treated as a personal communication between Queen Elizabeth and William. Others argued that any message carrying implications for the future of the monarchy could not remain confined to a single individual, regardless of the Queen's intentions. The debate was not loud, it was not public, but it was intense. Every discussion seemed to uncover another layer of uncertainty. The stakes felt enormous because everyone understood what was really being protected. This was never simply about a document. It was about the legacy of a monarch whose influence still shaped every corner of royal life. It was about the future king who now carried the burden of interpreting her final guidance. And it was about an institution that depended upon stability at a time when even the smallest misunderstanding could trigger lasting consequences. As internal discussions continued, concerns about leaks began growing rapidly. The more people who became aware of the document's existence, the greater the risk that fragments of information could escape into the public sphere. Palace officials reportedly feared a scenario in which incomplete details reached the media before the full context was understood. Such an outcome could distort the Queen's intentions, create unnecessary controversy, and deepen divisions already forming behind closed doors. That possibility weighed heavily on everyone involved. For William, however, the issue remained surprisingly clear. According to those familiar with his thinking, his focus was not on managing competing opinions, but on honoring what he believed his grandmother had wanted. The document existed for a reason. It had been protected for a reason. And if Queen Elizabeth had entrusted him with its contents, he reportedly felt a responsibility to approach those words with patience, respect, and absolute seriousness. The pressure was immense, yet the sense of duty guiding him appeared even stronger. Standing beside him throughout this difficult period was Catherine. Sources suggest she played a critical role in helping maintain balance as tensions continued to rise. While others debated strategy and consequences, Catherine reportedly focused on preserving unity within the family. She understood that emotional reactions could easily deepen existing divisions. The monarchy had endured countless challenges because its members found ways to navigate disagreement without allowing conflict to consume the institution itself. According to insiders, that principle became one of her guiding concerns as uncertainty intensified. Yet perhaps no one found themselves under greater strain than Charles. As king, he faced a uniquely difficult position. On one side stood personal relationships developed over years of shared experiences and family loyalties. On the other stood the institutional responsibilities that came with wearing the crown. Every decision carried implications beyond individual feelings. Every choice had the potential to influence how future generations would view both the monarchy and the legacy Queen Elizabeth left behind. Reports suggest he understood the sensitivity of the situation better than most, which only made the balancing act more challenging. Inside royal circles, anxiety continued to grow. Some feared the controversy would eventually fade. Others feared it would not. There was a growing sense that the document's existence had already altered relationships in subtle ways. Trust was being tested. Alliances were being examined. Assumptions that once seemed secure suddenly felt uncertain. And beneath every discussion lingered the same troubling question. What if the true impact of the Queen's message had not yet been revealed? That question became increasingly difficult to ignore as new details continued emerging. The controversy appeared close to being contained, yet something about the situation suggested the story was not finished. In fact, it may have been building toward its most significant moment all along. And just when it seemed the controversy might remain hidden forever, a final revelation emerged from the shadows. The deeper investigators looked, the clearer one thing became. This was never merely a document. It was a safeguard designed to protect a legacy Queen Elizabeth spent 70 years building. As the controversy surrounding the hidden file continued to unfold, a remarkable shift began taking place. The discussion was no longer focused on secrecy, access, or palace tensions. Instead, attention turned toward something much larger. The document had become a window into the way Queen Elizabeth viewed the monarchy itself. Every new detail seemed to point toward the same conclusion. She had not spent decades preparing for a single event or a single crisis. She had spent decades preparing for the future. That realization changed everything. Throughout her reign, Queen Elizabeth developed a reputation for thinking far beyond immediate headlines. While others concentrated on short-term challenges, she often focused on consequences that might not appear for years. It was one of the qualities that allowed her to guide the monarchy through periods of extraordinary change. Political landscapes shifted. Public expectations evolved. Entire generations came and went. Yet somehow the institution endured. Those closest to her frequently described a monarch who understood that preserving the crown required constant preparation for events that had not yet arrived. The document seemed to embody that philosophy. According to reports from individuals familiar with its significance, the file reflected a pattern that had defined Elizabeth's approach throughout her reign. She believed succession was not something that happened at the moment a throne changed hands. It was a process that began decades earlier. Every lesson passed on. Every responsibility delegated, every future leader quietly prepared. The crown survived because each generation invested in the next long before transition became necessary. Looking back, examples of that mindset appeared throughout royal history. Future kings and queens were often guided long before they formally inherited power. Knowledge was passed carefully from one generation to another. Experience became instruction. Duty became tradition. Queen Elizabeth reportedly understood this better than anyone. The hidden document was not an exception to that belief. It was perhaps its ultimate expression. What made the file so powerful was not necessarily what it contained, but what it represented. To many observers, it symbolized trust. Not public trust, but personal trust. a grandmother placing faith in the grandson she believed would one day carry forward the institution she had devoted her life to serving. Every page reportedly reflected preparation rather than control, guidance rather than command. The queen was not attempting to rule from beyond the grave. She was attempting to equip the future king with lessons earned through experience that no history book could fully capture. For William, that realization reportedly deepened the emotional impact of the discovery. Sources suggest that his perspective gradually shifted from viewing the document as a historical artifact to seeing it as a responsibility. The message was no longer about what Queen Elizabeth had done during her reign. It was about what he would need to do during his own. The future suddenly felt closer, the expectations heavier, the purpose clearer. If the document contained a roadmap, then it was now his task to decide how that guidance would shape the years ahead. Alongside that transformation stood Catherine, whose role within the monarchy appeared increasingly significant. As discussions about succession, legacy, and future leadership intensified, many insiders reportedly viewed her as an essential part of the next chapter. Her steady presence during the controversy reinforced a broader reality. The future of the crown would not rest on William alone. It would depend on the partnership supporting him and the example they provided together. At the same time, the document seemed to reignite a renewed commitment to preserving public confidence. Queen Elizabeth understood that trust was not inherited automatically. It had to be earned repeatedly. That lesson echoed throughout every discussion surrounding the file. The monarchy's strength ultimately depended on the faith people placed in it. Protecting that faith remained as important as protecting any tradition or title. Perhaps most striking of all was the growing recognition that some of the Queen's most important decisions had been set in motion years, even decades, before anyone realized their purpose. The hidden document was no sudden reaction to recent events. It was part of a much larger vision, a vision built patiently over time, waiting for the moment when its significance would finally be understood. And as William continued reflecting on the extraordinary responsibility left in his hands, another realization began to emerge. The story was no longer only about legacy, it was about emotion, about family, about the final connection between a beloved monarch and the grandson she trusted with the future. Yet the most emotional chapter of the story was still to come. Standing at the crossroads between past and future, William faced a choice few heirs ever encounter: to simply inherit a throne, or to carry forward a personal mission entrusted to him by the monarch who shaped modern Britain. By the time the full significance of Queen Elizabeth's hidden document became clear, the story had evolved far beyond a mystery buried within royal archives. It had become something deeply personal. What began as whispers surrounding a forgotten file had transformed into a powerful reminder of the bond between generations, a connection stretching from one of the most consequential monarchs in British history to the man destined to follow in her footsteps. For William, the document represented far more than guidance. It represented trust. Throughout his life, he had been prepared for responsibility. From childhood, every lesson, every expectation, and every challenge carried the knowledge that one day he would inherit the crown. Yet according to those familiar with the emotional impact of the document, this felt different. The words left behind by Queen Elizabeth reportedly carried a sense of personal faith that could not be measured by titles or constitutional roles. They reflected the confidence of a grandmother who had spent decades observing the character of the grandson she believed would one day lead the institution she had devoted her life to protecting. That realization reportedly stayed with him. The burden of the future suddenly felt intertwined with the memory of the past. Every lesson described within the document appeared connected to experiences Queen Elizabeth had lived through herself. Every warning reflected wisdom earned through sacrifice. Every reminder of duty carried the weight of 70 years spent navigating triumphs, crises, celebrations, and heartbreak. The document was not asking William to become another Elizabeth. It was challenging him to become the best version of himself, while carrying forward the principles she believed mattered most. Throughout that journey, Catherine remained beside him. Sources suggest that her presence became increasingly important as William processed the emotional significance of what had been entrusted to him. The pressures facing the future king were enormous, but they were not his alone. Together, William and Catherine represented the next chapter of the monarchy. Together, they would face expectations that seemed to grow heavier with every passing year. And together, they would carry the responsibility of transforming the Queen's lessons into a future capable of earning the same trust she spent a lifetime building. As discussions surrounding the document gradually settled, a broader reality began emerging. The monarchy itself was entering a new chapter. The transition from one era to another was no longer a distant concept. It was happening in real time. The values that defined Queen Elizabeth's reign were now being passed into new hands, not through public ceremonies or official announcements, but through the quiet transfer of wisdom from one generation to the next. Perhaps that is why the document resonated so deeply within royal circles. Its existence served as a reminder that some of the most important decisions are made long before their significance becomes apparent. Queen Elizabeth understood that leadership was not simply about reacting to events as they unfolded. It was about preparing for challenges that might not arrive for years. It was about building foundations strong enough to endure uncertainty. Most importantly, it was about ensuring that duty remained stronger than personal ambition. Those lessons now appeared more relevant than ever. Even after her passing, Queen Elizabeth's influence continued shaping conversations, decisions, and expectations. Her voice may have fallen silent, but the principles she championed remained woven into the institution she spent a lifetime serving. The hidden document was proof of that enduring legacy. Not because it contained secrets, but because it contained something far more valuable: perspective. And as William looked toward the future, carrying both the privilege and burden of what lay ahead, one truth became impossible to ignore. The greatest inheritance left behind by Queen Elizabeth was never measured in wealth, status, or authority. It was measured in responsibility, in service, in the understanding that leadership is ultimately about what is passed on to those who come after. Because in the end, the greatest power Queen Elizabeth left behind was not a crown, a palace, or a title. It was a message, a quiet reminder that monarchs come and go, scandals rise and fade, but duty endures. And for William, that private document may prove to be the most important inheritance of all. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.